y'all, it's Hope at Crafty Hope and welcome. It is week 6 of Crafty Hope prompts. Can you believe it? I cannot. Let me get to the meat of this. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Crafty Hope prompts is a challenge I came up with for myself to build a prompt deck. I realized that there are 52 weeks a year and 52 cards in a regular playing card deck. So I decided I would play on that and create a prompt deck, but instead of just one prompt a week, I'm drawing 3. So I have this container here that had 156 prompts in it that I am using to put on these cards. So 3 cards a week, or 3 prompts a week on a card. On Monday, today, I am drawing my 3 prompts, altering my card with those 3 prompts, adding them, and then later in the week I do a second project of any kind, a junk journal page, an art journal page, a shadow box tag, whatever I'm feeling, and use those 3 prompts on that project. So at the end of the year I should have a full prompt deck that I can use to pull 1 card and use those 3 prompts, or pull 3 cards and use the middle prompt on each of them, whatever I want to do. If you want to play along, there's so many ways to do that. You can just use the prompts that I pull each week, or I've got the full list of prompts down below. If you want to start and make your own week 1 and start pulling prompts, that's great. You can make a prompt project, you can make an altered card, however you want to do this. I just ask that you use the hashtag CraftyHopePrompts so that I can see what you make and how you're using this idea. Alright guys, let's get to the prompts and the card making, and if you have any questions, something I didn't cover, let me know. Sometimes my brain and my mouth get ahead of each other and not everything comes out the way it should. So, alright, I'm gonna put my other cards, my first 5 weeks of cards, and we're gonna pull 3 prompts here. Let's see. Just gonna dive right in. The first one is vintage. Oh, y'all, this makes me so happy. This could be anything vintage. I could use vintage book paper or ledger paper or vintage photos, or what else is vintage? I've got all kinds of little vintagey ephemera pieces, and I'm trying to think, vintage stickers. I do have some vintage stickers, vintage stamps, all kinds of vintage things. I could do an assemblage project using vintage components of some kind for my project later in the week. Probably not my altered card. I'd love to know if you have any other suggestions of what items might be vintage that you would work into a project. Let me know. Alright, so that is prompt 1. Let's go for prompt 2, which is StazOn. And that, all StazOn is for me is a permanent stamp ink. This is my typical one, is some black StazOn. I have it in a couple other colors. If you have some other kind of permanent ink, I think archival is permanent. Even if you wanted to do like, I know I said Sharpie last week for alcohol ink, but something that's permanent would work. Any kind of permanent ink. When I wrote these up, this is what I meant, was a StazOn stamp pad. But you interpret that how you want. If you don't like that prompt or can't think of something, pull another prompt. Use one from last week or the week before. Something that inspires you a little bit more. Only use 2 of the prompts. Seriously, this is an open thing. Alright, so for my last prompt, I think, yeah, I've got one. Watercolor marker. Alright, so that's a little bit. I've got are they Tombow? I've got 2 sets of Tombow markers, which is what I was thinking, but you can get any kind of water soluble marker and work. Some of the Crayola ones are water soluble, and use that, and then take a paintbrush and pull that out. That's all I'm really thinking, is some kind of water soluble marker. And so when I wrote this, I put watercolor marker for the Tombows that I have, but I think I might have some of the distress markers. I don't even know if you can buy distress markers anymore. I've got the stamp marker, things like that, that will blur when you add water to them. So those are my 3 prompts. So I've got something that moves, something that doesn't, and something that's been here for a while. So vintage StazOn and watercolor marker. I'm going to think on that for just a minute, and then we're going to alter my playing card. All right, let me tell you real quick what I've gathered for my 3 prompts. For vintage, I went simple. I have just got this vintage book. Now remember that vintage typically means 25 years or more. So, I mean, that puts you at the 90s. So, vintage, you can play with that however you want. I have this book, and I think I don't even know, y'all. It's some kind of puzzle game book that's just got these neat things. So I'm going to use it, I think, because I've never used it. And when I saw that it didn't have a spine, I was like, well, that's vintage. So that's simply enough. I'm going to use some vintage paper, book paper. For StazOn, because I've got these pads, I've got a green one and a pink one as well, but I tend to just like my black one. I think because I've got StazOn and watercolor marker, I'm going to kind of combine those with their aspects that you can use those together. Once you stamp something, you can then color it in and blend it with a watercolor marker. So that's my idea. I've got a stack of stamps here that I might play with, as well as some deli paper and tissue paper for layering. And then I've got this container of markers that I consider watercolor markers. Some of these, y'all, I think they're the ink brand, and they're just brush tip markers. These are just from the Dollar Tree, I believe. I'm not even positive that they are let's see. We're gonna test that real quick here. Put a little bit there, and I've got a water brush. You could just use a paintbrush, which I may do. And yeah, it moves some. It's not great, but it would be fine to play with if that's all you've got. So I say take some of the markers you've got and see if you can move them around. That might be a great way to experiment this week, is to use some of the other markers you have on hand. But I have this whole pile, so I'm probably going to use that. And of course I've got my water and my matte gel medium and paintbrush. So I'm going to get started. I went ahead and pulled one of the pages. I found a damaged page in that vintage book, so that's what I pulled out. And I'm using it. I'm just putting some matte gel onto my card and laying it straight onto that vintage paper. And this paper, y'all, is so brittle. It was almost crumbling on me. So I kind of maybe want to play with that book paper some more. I've seen Nicole Watson before has some that she just crumbles on top of a paper and like spreads it out, and it does such neat things. So I may have to play with that later. But I trimmed, I tore some of it, and I'm trimming that excess. And then I'm going to do the other side as well. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know that when I'm doing these prompt cards, I'm making one side my decorative side, where I use my prompts and kind of experiment with them. And then the other side's my more functional side, where it's less decorative, and I'm just going to put my prompts with a little bit of like corresponding decorations. So, and I don't know when I put these papers down which side is going to be which. I'm just trying to get the sides covered. So I covered that other side, and when I did it, I wasn't super keen on the margin space there, so I'm going to use some of that other that I cut off or tore off and layer it a little bit on this one side because it got the bottom edge or whatever. So, and again, I'm just using matte gel. I could have probably just used a glue stick or something, but this paper is pretty heavy, so I thought I'd go ahead and use the matte gel. I think that's what I've been using on the other cards anyway. So again, I'm trimming this down, and once I get it nice and trimmed, I go ahead and pull out my StazOn and one of my texture stamps. So when I went looking, that my first thought, because I knew I was going to use that book paper, was to get some texture stamps on there so I don't obscure all of the background, but add to it, kind of give it more texture with these texture stamps. So I started with just the jet black StazOn, and then pulled out my sepia colored archival ink, since I knew I also had that. And while I was thinking about it, I don't have just those couple of StazOn. I also have a brown StazOn and a purple one, and so I may pull out more for my project later this week. But anyway, I'm using this sepia archival. I might have a purple archival too. I'm not sure. I'll have to go through my stamp pads. But I'm using a text stamp here to just add another layer and another color on here. I'll tell you that when I was pulling out my stamps, because that's what I'm doing next, stamping this lady, I started to pull out some kind of whimsical fun ones that I hadn't used that I thought would be fun to color with the watercolor markers. But then I stopped myself and I thought about it for a second and was like, well, what is it I want to make? What do I enjoy making? What do I feel is the most me-like thing to do? And that's when I pulled out this stamp with this lady on it and some of the other texture stamps and those kind of things. And this stamp too, which I think may be a vintage stamp. I'm not real sure where I got it. Maybe a thrift store. It's probably in one of my thrifty hauls. I think I probably got it at one of the local thrift stores. So it looks very vintage. So that could be in my little bit of vintage too. But I'm stamping it with both that archival and the StazOn as well, just because, and I'm doing that on tissue paper. So I did the lady, I did on deli paper, and that was purposeful because I want her to be transparent, but I want to be able to color on her with those watercolor markers. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to do that on tissue paper. It's just too thin and absorbent, whereas this deli paper isn't quite as absorbent. So that was my thought. And now I've got her kind of almost fussy cut out, but just cut down. And I grabbed one of the Tombos. This is a green one. It's kind of a, I don't know, bluish green. And I am coloring on like the darker lines of the stamp where there's like the shadow. That's where I'm coloring on her. And then I'm grabbing my water brush and just kind of pulling that color out over the rest of of her dress so that the darker areas do still stay kind of dark with that green, but it all is, her dress is going to be green. So I thought this was fun. I'm really kind of happy that I got these two things together. This is something that I probably want to do all the time, but I don't think to do it. And that's part of the reason I like having the 3 prompts is to see how I combine different prompts and different things so that I'm not just getting one prompt and doing the same thing I would normally do with those materials. Does that make sense? Like when I pull out my StazOn, I might stamp it, but I might not always color it with markers like these. I might instead, I'm trying to think what I would do. I don't know. I might use just watercolors, So sometimes your habit is to pull out the same materials when you use one prompt. And I'm trying to, with these 3 prompts, combine things that I might not otherwise combine. So I think that's my thought in pulling the 3. So I also colored, she has a little bit of skin showing there on her back, and so I used a combination of like a mustard yellow and a brown marker to give her more of a just a skin tone. And now I'm cutting her a little bit closer so I can stick her on my card. But before I do that, I think I decide to do something else on the card. First, I'm going to ink up the edges using that same green marker. And again, this is a Tombow marker. I don't know what the color is. Maybe I'll find what number or whatever it is. And then I am using a wet paintbrush, super wet, to just pull that color into the card a little bit. And when I finally hit the 4th side, I'm going to splatter. I'm going to, whatever's left of ink on that paintbrush, I'm going to splatter. It was just a tiny little bit. And then I dry it real quick before I come in, and I'm using fluid gel medium and grabbed those stamps I made on the tissue paper. And I was trying to figure out which side was which and which side I liked more, because it seemed like the side I stamped on bled a little bit. And since this is see-through, the other side that I didn't stamp on was, I don't know, less bleedy it's looking. So I was like, well, I'll just use that side. So I tore it down a little bit And as you saw, I used my wet paintbrush there to help me tear it a little bit better where I wet the area I wanted to tear, and that helps. It's not something I remember to do often, but I remembered this time. And then I'm using the fluid medium to adhere it. Now, what's great with tissue paper and the jelly print, and there's a couple other things you can use like that, that when you put it down with like a fluid medium like this, it just almost disappears. Some you can do that with some other adhesives, but I find the fluid medium for me, it does the most. And you'll see in some of the uh, close-up pictures I have at the end, it doesn't like completely disappear. Some of that white of the tissue paper is still there, but a lot of the background is still very visible. So I just love this. And this works great with the StazOn because that's not going to bleed or anything. So I'm going to put my girl down with my watercolor marker on her, and I wanted to be very careful as I adhered her because, like I said, that coloring isn't permanent. It is watercolor, so it's very likely going to move. So that's part of the reason I use that scraper. I scraped it off, and you can see some of that green came off of my scraper because it came off of my girl there. So I was very careful not to try to overwork that and get all of her color off. And then I dipped into another vintage book and found found a phrase, and it says Helena rose to her feet, her mind occupied, which I thought was great for that image. It's just because that lady's standing and she's got her back to you, like maybe she's thinking about something. And yeah, I really like that phrase. So I cut it down, and I'm just going to use my glue stick to stick that down. And then I will flip the card over, and we're going to start working on the other side. Yeah, so here's just my Uhu glue stick, and I'm finishing this up. This one was really, I don't know, these prompts, this video seems really long, like I struggled through this, but these prompts worked so beautifully together, I think. I hope y'all find a way to work with them as well, because yeah, this was a lot of fun. All right, so there's that side, and now I'm flipping it over, and I'm taking the rest of that tissue paper that I had stamped on with the um, bird with flourishes on it. I don't even know what you call that stamp. It's such a neat stamp, and like I said, I'm fairly sure it is vintage. It's gotta be. And I'm sticking it down just randomly. I'm using whatever scraps I can pick up and just, layering like one of the black ones down, one of the brown ones down, one of the black ones down. And just getting a bit more texture on that other side, because this is, like I said, going to be my more functional side and less decorative, but I don't want to leave it out. It can't just be plain. So it's getting a little decorative. I think I have a little bit of trouble here. I'm going to try to stick that piece down, and it just kept moving. When I stick things down on art journals or things like this, I almost always do them either horizontally or vertically. Um, I I never do like diagonal. That's just, there's something about that just feels off to me. Everything feels cattywampus. I don't know if it's a me thing or if it's an aesthetic thing. That, I don't know if some of my OCD won't let me do it vertically. I mean, do it diagonally, or if that's just an aesthetic thing that everybody has. So that one little piece kept trying to turn diagonal, and I was like, oh no, you don't. So I got it finally fixed down. And once all of it was stuck down, I'm just trimming off some of that excess. And oh, my desk was a mess, so I have to get all of that up before it disappears into it. All those little pieces of tissue everywhere. And of course, I found one little tiny scrap that had more of the stamp on it. And I think, do I try this real quick? And I used my little scraper to make sure everything was stuck down. And then, oh, I know what I decided to do some splatter. So I took that same green marker and a paintbrush that I wet. And you saw I scribbled that marker onto a little piece of acetate, and I am splattering it. Now, I may play with that some more
to do some like intentional splatter where I put the acetate, the wet acetate down onto my surface. That might be something I do for my project. We'll see. And I did cut down my prompts here, and I'm thinking that I wanted to alter them just a little. So I'm going to grab that green marker again, and just along the top edge of all three of these prompts, I'm going to color it just along that top edge. We'll get there. It's just something I wanted to try while I have these watercolor markers out, and this is my project for this week, or my prompt for this week. I really wanted to kind of push it and see the different things I could do. Could I splatter it? Could I color with it? Could I do the edges? They just everything. So I've got all of those top edges colored, and I'm sticking down my prompts in the order that I pulled them. For me, that's very important for when I use them later, that's the order I pulled them in, so it's still that random order. And now I'm going to take my water brush and pull down just to the word that little bit of color. It is not a huge thing. It is just a tiny little accent, but it makes that white not so off-putting. And I had to get some more water out of my water brush. It was getting dry on me. And so once I get those three, I'm going to go ahead and color the edges with the brown marker that I had used earlier and do the same thing. Just color those edges and use my wet paintbrush to pull some of that color in. And then I'm going to dry it because all of those edges, oh, and I think I do splatter a little bit of that brown when I get all of those edges done. And then I'm going to dry it because I get water all over it. And my last thing is one of my stamp pads has a number in it. So I grabbed the 6 and I'm going to stamp that in the upper right corner to indicate that this is week 6. And that's it for this card, y'all. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Let me know what you think. If you have any suggestions on how these prompts could be used, and if you are playing along, make sure you use that hashtag CraftyHopePrompts so that I can see your beautiful creations. All right, y'all, if you like this, give me a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe, and I will see y'all later. Bye.